this a little challenging for the camera guy and step away from the computer since we have this. Can everyone hear me in the back okay? Excellent. So I'm hungry too, so I'll try to keep this brief. As Nick said, I'm Meredith. I'm the Executive Director of the West Big Data Innovation Hub, which is one of 4 hubs seed funded from the National Science Foundation. It's really an honor to close out all of the amazing talks that we've heard over this multi-day extravaganza of everything to do with text analysis. I remember when John De Niro and Nick and I were sitting right in that room back there and brainstorming the launch of this TextXD community and the initiative and our first workshops. And I think it was just what was so fantastic about that conversation was the nature of the collaborative spirit. I don't know how many of you have had the direct opportunity to exchange enthusiastic emails with Nick, but I actually took a look at some of our text exchanges over the past couple of days, and it usually goes something like this. One of us says, "I have plans, let's work together," and then the other says, "Awesome, fantastic, how might we make this happen?" And so that sort of, let's work together, how might we framework has been really critical for the birth of the hubs, which have only been around for about 2 years now. And so whether you're in the Northeast, the South, the Midwest, or the West region, or not in this map, we are, after all, part of a global ecosystem, you'll appreciate that it's important to connect to other stakeholders, as we've heard throughout this conference. And this alignment is really true to our mission for the hubs, which is to build and strengthen partnerships across all sectors: academia, nonprofits, government at all levels, and industry. And we're doing this specifically to address societal challenges, scientific challenges that are pressing, to help spur economic development, and to really build up and foster this innovation ecosystem that is much broader than any one given cylinder of excellence. And so for those, how many of you folks are familiar with the National Science Foundation? I imagine a good amount. If you've seen this chart before, you're probably familiar with a lot of the fundamental science work and the infrastructure elements. With the birth of the big data hubs, this really fills a niche for people-centered partnerships. At the kickoff of this TextXD symposium, John Moore spoke about individuals and organizations and that duality, and that very much comes into our day-to-day operations. A little bit of history catch-up here. We're standing or sitting here right now in BIDS, which was part of a series of exciting announcements that happened during the Obama administration in the 2012 or so time frame. $200 million pledged there, and 12.5 of that went to forming all of this great collaborative space that you're sitting in right now. The Big Data Hubs, building off of that momentum, was launched with some charrettes around the country, designed brainstorming sessions to really pull together diverse stakeholders. And so in 2015, as a result of that, there was $6 million spent to establish the 4 hubs that you just saw. And in the year following, this was a very busy winter break because we launched, my first day on the job was November 1st, and then January 7th, I think, was all of the letters of collaboration and letters of intent for spokes projects was due. And so if you look at the amount of funding there, it's pretty, as my old boss at DHS used to say, scrappy and requires us to be resourceful given the mission that we're trying to connect all of these different stakeholders across all of these sectors for social impact. And so we've had additional partnerships in our first couple of years that include everything from the Computing Community Consortium to donations in kind from groups like datascience.com, we heard from yesterday, and many other partners. And since you don't go to the gym to meditate on fitness, we take that philosophy that in order to build up the muscle and strengthen these partnerships, we need action verbs. We need to create infectious action. That was actually the title of a course at the design school across the bay that I used to go to. But no matter your affiliation or institution, you could understand that these action verbs of connecting the fabric that is producing these really exciting innovations, of convening people from different backgrounds, different disciplines, points of view, of curating resources that can be shared, whether that's tools and platforms, data sets themselves, or the people resources, and then really communicating. I was speaking to some of the BIDS fellows yesterday and noting that communication really isn't about what you're saying, it's about what's being heard. And so having that understanding of empathy with the person on the receiving end, whether that's an enthusiastic Nick saying, let's work together and how might we make this happen, or if it's somebody who's a little bit less enthusiastic at the start, as some of our other speakers have alluded to. That type of work is really what we try to foster more of, and all of this essentially builds towards the idea that we need to be able to create a movement together. So we pulled together the community around specific topical or thematic areas here in the West Hub. Some of these are really ripe for collaboration right now, like metro data science, smarter cities and communities, transportation I'll touch upon in the next slide, precision medicine, which is actually my application area that I used to work on as a PhD student and postdoc, natural resources and hazards, from water to emergency response, and something that really is aligned with the ethos of BIDS, which is data-enabled scientific discovery and learning. And so if you look at some of the topics here, like open science and reproducibility, education and workforce development, you'll see that that's actually quite cross-cutting. Those are important to you whether you work on anti-terrorism efforts, looking at protests, looking at water data or smart cities. And we have a number of other cross-cutting efforts that have been developed over the past few months and years, from cloud computing to looking at public policy. Do we have any policy folks or people interested in policy in the audience? One, two, okay. I think it's not really by chance that 4 out of the 5 executive directors of the Big Data Hubs are former AAAS Science and Technology Policy Fellows. There's this nice overlap of trying to, as John mentioned, impact a social fabric that is bigger than one's own, and that interplay between the science and the technology, the policymakers, and how that affects real people, your mother, your grandmother, your tax-paying neighbor, is really critical to a lot of the hub efforts. So given that we're all hungry and we're running a little bit late, I'm not going to dive into all of these, but I have 3 quick examples of how the hubs really function as a vehicle for some of this community connection. So the first actually involves datascience.com. This was a workshop on the science of data storytelling. We thought when we were planning this workshop that we would have about 30 or so interested people trying to find collaborators to get the community excited about helping crowdsource data, or maybe people who are looking to refine their pitches to funding agencies. Thanks to the power of live streaming and the lovely datascience.com URL, we ended up having over 700 people from 15 different countries joining in on this professional development skill building. And so this was really exciting. We had folks like the founder of polygraph.cool working on some really interesting film data about gender roles. I know that Julia mentioned some similar elements in her talk yesterday. And this is great because you can still catch all of this even if you weren't there. We recorded the talks, they're on our YouTube channel. And it actually, if you follow the hashtag DataSciStories, you can see that it's now a series. We revisited the topic with AAAS Science Magazine, the Washington Post, for an event in DC just this past summer. That's all recorded and available on YouTube as well. As you can imagine, if you think about storytelling, there's a lot of potential text extravaganza to be done around that. And so I definitely would invite you to connect about how we might grow the series to something where you're actually one of the folks leading the next in the series. It's a really exciting initiative and an opportunity to connect with a number of different folks. I'll point out here that 60% of the people who attended our first workshop were actually from industry. The second element is also cross-cutting, whether you're interested in health data or other topics like education and whatnot. This was one of the last things we did before the inauguration in DC. Mid-December, we had this workshop with over 125 different enthusiasts. We brought together these folks to vote with our feet with IDEO as a design facilitator. And so we did things like having an axis on the room and saying, do you feel that it's more important as you're building data science capacity in your organization to have top-down mandates and guidance and direction, or is it more important, and would you vote with your feet to be over here, that you need to have the grassroots people who are rolling up their sleeves and doing some of the grunt work? And so this was a fascinating conversation because we had people like Bloomberg building up their internal data science team, because we had folks like my home at AmpLab/Rise Lab that have a lot of really interesting data science capacity. We had people from federal government who maybe had one, if they're lucky, maybe two people who wore a data science hat. And so all of these led to essentially this roundtable sharing of asks and offers, how we might collaborate better together to share some of these best practices and lessons learned around building up data science teams effectively. And I know that since there's so many sociologists in the room, that this is probably near and dear to your heart as well. And so you can definitely still participate. We have a bit.ly there, bit.ly Data Hubs, which has a quick survey to share about yourself and your organization, and we're trying to pull that together and share the results with the community, put together a white paper to help keep the conversation going. I know all of us here were listening to other talks at 10 a.m. when this webinar happened, but we actually recorded a webinar today from one of our co-PIs, Ariel Rokem from the University of Washington. He was sharing in this webinar and having some Q&A around a very relevant opportunity that we just announced to be a data carpentry instructor. This is a new partnership between the West Big Data Innovation Hub and Data Carpentry. How many of you are familiar with data carpentry? Yeah, a couple, good. So they actually recently combined with software carpentry and are now the carpentry, so it's like some retro 70s band, but still the same effort of trying to train more people in these fundamental data skills. And so we're really excited to partner with them. We're hosting in March 2018 a Train the Trainer workshop. And then all of those trainers can then go back to their home institutions or hometowns and cities and host their own training workshop. So there's more details on that bit.ly there. I'm happy to chat more about the opportunity. The final example of how the hubs are serving as a vehicle for this community connection and strengthening is something that we just had a national summit on this month. This is a National Transportation Data Challenge. It was a new model that we put together after discussions with the Chief Data Officer of the Department of Transportation on, we go to so many hackathons, and often you put people together in a room all day Saturday, and you get like 10 different versions of where's my bus. And we were thinking, well, maybe we could do better. There's definitely, if you're a cyclist or a pedestrian, anybody worried about all of the folks texting and nearly hitting you as you're crossing the street here, you may know that over the last 2 years, the increase in traffic-related fatalities has been 14%. Just in 2016, there were over nearly 6,000 pedestrian fatalities, which is the largest number in more than 2 decades. And so with the hubs as a vehicle, we wanted to partner with all of these great industry groups and federal government agencies to try to highlight different contributions, whether it's from the connected vehicle space or the building an education curriculum around transportation safety data for high school students and undergrads. We wanted to highlight all of those different ways that we can work together to tackle this challenge. And so there's a number of different resources, from new data sets, new platforms and tools, offers of mentorship from groups like the MIT Venture Lab that are all captured on this website. And then also, if you go to this bit.ly NTDC docs, you can see the full agenda and a 6-month update on the progress there. So particularly for TextXD, just to highlight, there's a lot of data around police reports, around crashes, social media, and evacuation for emergency response and so forth, that I think could really be right grounds for collaboration. One of the elements that grew out of the National Transportation Data Challenge working group around emergency response was actually very nicely meshed with an event that we hosted here in BIDS just a couple of weeks ago. This was an NSF workshop on translational data science, the confluence of industry and academia. And one of the solid takeaways with Claudia Blandicano and various fellows coming out of this workshop was the desire to help out the folks right here in our backyard, the community affected by the Northern California fires that just happened. And so we're pulling together, this is a long-term effort. This, on purpose says recovery. It's not the acute response. We're looking at rebuilding, helping these communities on the timescale of years and decades. And so if you're at all interested in this, we're looking to form a very interdisciplinary team to help directly the emergency managers and folks looking at rebuilding there. So please join our team. So I'll leave you, and we can go to lunch now, with that question of how might we, and encourage you to have more enthusiastic email exchanges and in-person exchanges on I have plans, let's work together, and how might we.